research also looking at serotonin levels that serotonin is a neurochemical in our brain that is implicated in sleep and arousal, and that can be dysregulated for people with ADHD. So when we're supposed to be hypo aroused, so having a lower level of arousal, we're almost having a hyper arousal, because again, if an environment doesn't provide enough stimulation to someone with ADHD, the ADHD brain will create and try to seek it. So we're always in this negotiation with our environment of, okay, I need enough stimulation that grounds me, but not too much that keeps me awake, but not too little, where, I remember in third grade, and this is so diagnostic, my wonderful third grade teacher, Miss Wade, who I adored, she had us write a paragraph of a fictional character that we related to. And all the boys wrote like the Hulk and Superman. And I'm like, really? You relate to the Hulk? Maybe you want to be the Hulk, but I don't think you can relate to the Hulk.
Maybe when I get angry, I break everything.
Talk about some anger management skills. Right? But I wrote Goldilocks from the Three Bears. And my teacher was like, Goldilocks? And I said, yeah, because for Goldilocks, this bed was too hard and this bed was too soft, but this was just right. And this porridge was too hot, this porridge was too cold. And to people with ADHD, there is this sort of specificity that we need to kind of like shape our environment so it's just right. And it can almost feel or seem like almost obsessive compulsive. And sometimes people with ADHD have OCD traits, but that's a little different. That's more of, this is what I need to ground myself. And so when I tell you today, I have to sleep a certain way, with my wedge pillow, with the temperature of the room a certain way, with a comforter that's weighted enough, that's what's going to get me to sleep.
I am grinning because my 12-year-old who has ADHD, his room, we have room darkening curtains, we have the fan, we have the noise machine, we have the weighted blanket. All of those things need to be in place before he can sleep.
So, that's awesome that he already is working on that and understands all that, because I think for a lot of people with ADHD, if they don't understand the context of it, they might, unfortunately, I think one of the greatest obstacles to ADHD is shame, and this idea that a lot of people will be like, oh, well, why can't I just be one of those people that just like go to sleep? I shouldn't need all of these things, or they don't always know that they need kind of all of these things. But absolutely, I don't know how people sleep with the sheet on them. I have to have a comforter that's like thick, that literally is almost, I think of it as literally holding me into my bed. Like, you are now going to sleep, because I feel like I'm going to levitate if I don't have.
So relatable.
We're also wondering about
ADHD,
if and how they impact sleep.
So one of the treatments of ADHD is medication, and it's either stimulant medication or non-stimulant medication. But particularly with stimulant medication, it's tricky because for some individuals, if they take a dose, let's say later in the day, it could impact their sleep and keep them up. And at the same time, I've had patients of all ages who have a dose of medication actually in the early evening, which actually helps them go to sleep, because they're better able to ground themselves, to get done what they need to get done, to actually focus, as strange as it sounds, focus on going to sleep. And anecdotally, I didn't start drinking coffee till I was in my early 30s, and that's what the birth of my first child, that got me to.
That's when we start drinking coffee. You have kids, that's it.
You have kids, that'll just get you into coffee. And I would notice that, just anecdotally, I would drink sometimes like a cup of coffee, like a half hour, 45 minutes before bed, and I would sleep better.
That would keep me up all night if I had it that late.
So if my wife had coffee past 3 p.m., that impacts her sleep. I am a half hour to 45 minutes. Now, why is that? Because caffeine obviously is a stimulant. And what's happening is that it's enough of a stimulant, but not too much, that it's enabling me to focus on going to sleep and going to bed. Like managing the impulsivity of all of the things that might get in the way between point A of I should go to bed to point B, which is actually getting to bed. So I always tell people with medication, what we know about stimulant medication is it's truly a unique individual experience, because you can have two people who both take the same dose, let's say, of Adderall, who respond totally differently to it because of just the nature of their ADHD and their own chemistry. Because ADHD is interacting, with your environment. So I always tell people it's not necessarily that, you take stimulants, it's going to create a problem with sleep. To that individual, it might help them reduce their impulsivity, to focus and regulate their attention so that it enables them to go to sleep indirectly. So I'm not saying that a stimulant is a sleep aid, but that it enables in managing one's ADHD, which then becomes the thing that could make it problematic.
That's such a good clarification. I think parents and listeners will really appreciate hearing that, because I think there are a lot of myths around that. So I think clearing that up is super important.
That leads me to another, I don't know if it's a myth or not, Roberto, I'm going to ask you this. So, as parents, we get a lot of warnings, right, about how much sleep kids should be getting. Is it really true across the board that all kids need this certain amount of sleep? And when do parents really need to be worrying about their child not getting enough sleep?
So, in general, there are these guidelines, that the National Sleep Foundation will set at, certain ages that you need a certain amount of sleep to really do the work that sleep is really meant to do, which is it's meant to kind of repair our brains and our bodies, give us some rest. Our brain is actually quite active when we're sleeping. It's consolidating our information from the day before. It's boosting our immune system. It's regulating our metabolism. So I always tell people that, sleep deprivation is not just about losing sleep. It affects our metabolic cycle, and that's why sleep deprivation and weight issues can go hand in hand. It certainly can affect our concentration, but not just our concentration because we're tired, but because our brain hasn't properly done that work on consolidating that information. So it might be harder to access information. And I could tell you, is in my experience with ADHD, it was really much later in my adult life where I really came to terms with understanding, because when I was in my 20s, definitely, I saw sleep as very disposable. Like I honestly was like, well, sleep is what happens when there's no more fun to be had. Or there's no more work to be done. And I'm somebody, I can find fun very easily, and I love my work. I truly love what I do. So to me, it was like, I did not respect sleep in the ways that I should have. So that's sort of one of those things I'm almost having this, newer relationship with. So to your question, there are these guidelines that, let's say for, a pre-adolescent or adolescent, especially where they're growing, it, could be anywhere from like 8 to 10 and a half hours of sleep a night. Now, are most teenagers getting that amount of sleep a night? Absolutely not. Like, we really are in a sleep debt. And at the same time, to also know that not everybody needs that amount. Like, I can honestly tell you, the only times I've ever slept more than 8 hours was when times like I was sick.
Never.
Flu, or I was massively sleep deprived and just making up on. I've never been an 8-hour sleeper. So it really comes down to how I always tell people, because a lot of adults, especially that I work with, be like, no, I'm good on 4 hours of sleep. I'm like, well, maybe, but let's look at that. How much caffeine are you ingesting? And some of them like, oh, I only have like, 4, 5-shot lattes. Or I'm like,
every
well,
2 hours.
That doesn't work. Or if it's the kind of thing, because especially with ADHD, and this, I had to understand this myself, is I'm never bored at what I do, like at my work. And so I can be really tired, but once I'm in the office and I'm talking with people, I'm activated, I'm turned on. So the question isn't always like, do you fall asleep at work? It could be, well, what happens in the moment that you're not stimulated? We always want to look at that, because if it's the moment you're not stimulated, you're falling asleep, you're not getting enough sleep. What's your mood like? Because the other thing is, lots of people can get by. Like, I got by on 2-3 hours of sleep in graduate school all the time. Was I optimal? No, I wasn't optimally functioning. Like, I mean, in so many, different ways. So it's looking at our mood states. So it's, if you were to go to sleep, and just kind of not have your alarm wake you up, how many hours,
circadian rhythm,
feel refreshed in that way.
Oh, you're both dead. God.
actually have opened my mind to how many sleep challenges there actually are out there. And so now, with all these challenges out there, especially for kids with ADHD, what are your like top recommendations for how to help kids sleep?
They're gone.
Yeah, so one is I always want to involve kids too, and one, just validating to them, well, first, it could be hard for a lot of people, whether you have ADHD or not, to get to sleep, to have a bedtime routine. However, it is definitely something that's very common, and part of having ADHD is the difficulty with that. And almost trying to approach it in a fun kind of way of like, okay, what are the things that we can do to sort of make it happen? And it won't just be one thing. It'll often be these kind of like all like the darkening shades and the this and the this and the, and for them not to look at that as this is like so high maintenance, but to look at it as like, oh my gosh, because when you do find those proper toolbox and you get a good night's sleep, it's like amazing. It's like, I don't care if I have to do 10 cartwheels before, I have to go to, if that's what's going to get me. So you first sort of lay that out, and then it's really trying different things, like in trying to understand what is the thing that's difficult. Is it that when you get to sleep, your mind is thinking and thinking and thinking, and then you're activated. So that could then be having some stimulation in the room. So it's like Goldilocks, where it can't be too much. So sometimes when I just know I have a lot on my mind, I'll have on my phone, I'll put Enya, who, for those of you who don't know, Enya is a Gaelic, amazing, sail away, amazing, brilliant artist who has the most like ethereal, like lush music. So I'll put an Enya song on repeat, the same song, at a low volume that I'm not super stimulated, but it's loud enough that I can hear it. And why that, again, that Goldilocks zone is it's enough that my mind is paying attention to that and not attending to maybe the sounds outside. So now it could, and I say the same song on repeat because if it's different songs, your brain's like, ooh, novelty, novelty, novelty. Now for other kids, it could be either a fan in terms of the wind on them. It could be, the lighting in the room. If there's a digital clock, maybe we need to get rid of that clock. Any amount of light. Now, there are other kids that might say if it's too dark, they might get a little scared and start thinking of things, so then they might need a nightlight. And a nightlight could be almost like their North Star that they're sort of looking at, and then that enables them to fall asleep. So it's always about trying to understand the function of what gets in the way. Now, for some kids, it could be the actual bed and the sensory experience of sleep. And I know this for myself. Like, I sleep with a wedge pillow because, I sleep at an angle, basically. Because and this was even when I was a kid, I couldn't explain it except to say if I was lying flat, I felt as if my head was angled down, like in a dentist chair.
Yep, I have sensory issues, and that's so relatable to me. You feel like you're falling backwards, even though you're not.
Have you guys ever tried falling asleep with your head tilted backwards?
Because again, ADHD individuals are very sensory,
like off the bed,
defensive. We're sensitive by nature. I mean, emotionally, physically. So even the sheets. It could also be being aware.
I've never
of
had
what
that
you're
though.
doing before
Sheets being feeling or having to need sheets that feel like they're strangling you.
It's not always going to be what you think it is. So to give you an example, I work out when I go to the gym. I go to a 24-hour gym. Tuesdays and Thursday nights, I see patients until 9, and I work out after that. And on the nights I work out, I sleep so much better. Now, most people would be like, what? Like, how does that not activate you to wake up? It's the same thing with the coffee 45 minutes before. ADHD, we're sort of, we're a little out of the box. And so sometimes even the things that parents, understandably, because they want the best for their child, will be like, oh, that definitely is not going to be good for them. I would say, just like we're teaching kids to be curious, and we want parents to also be involved in that process of knowing what might totally not work for them could very much work for their ADHD child.
So one of the things I think I'm hearing is involve your child in picking out sheets and comforters to some degree, right? Like bring them to the store and have them choose them. Try out things that you as a parent may not think would work for you, but let your, like running around the block or something like that. Although in the middle of the night, it's probably a bad idea, but you know what I mean. Like,
well, I mean, it's funny you mentioned that, Amanda, that precise example, because when my son was like 5 years old, I live in a cul-de-sac, and it would be, to get him to bed 9 o'clock, we would run around the cul-de-sac, and my neighbors thought I was a little crazy. And
we do that in our cul-de-sac, which is why that example may have come out of my mouth, because we're doing that. Gretchen, did you have a couple of other things you wanted to hit on too?
Well, I'm looking at our list of wonders for what might work, and I think we also wondered about diet, because families are always hearing things about how diet affects their kids throughout the day, including sleep, and so is there any truth to that, the diet?
So eating, definitely, that could be a whole other podcast, because I do a lot of work in eating. I work with boys and men with eating disorders is a whole other specialty in the world that I'm in. But particularly this intersection of ADHD and whether it's impulsive eating or not enough nutrition in eating. And people with ADHD individuals, we love sugar. I mean, we crave sugar. We love those simple carbs because they're dopamine producing, that neurochemical that's implicated in reward. So it is definitely very important, especially for parents to know, in terms of regulating, eating. And a lot of times too, even what nutritionists will tell you is sometimes it's not so much what we're eating that's as much as the issue as what we're not eating. And so sugar, of course, is not great if you're having it in large amounts, but what really isn't great about it is because it's satiating us, we're not eating maybe enough vegetables, or we're not eating enough protein. And that's the real source that gives us that executive energy, is high protein. So absolutely, that would be another thing to think about, is why it might be difficult. Oh, maybe you didn't have enough protein.
So what I'm hearing is chocolate-covered broccoli.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like that you're saying that it may not be what they're eating, but what they're not eating, right? And I'm going to use that in my house, because I've got a lack of protein with one of my children who also has sleep challenges. And so I think we'll be talking about more protein. Maybe we'll notice which nights are the better nights of sleep.
Yeah, because sometimes, the reason that we might not be sleeping, too, is the primitive, when it comes down to it, we need to eat, we need to sleep, and we need to drink water to survive. So those are the three most basic things. So if one of those is not, if any of those, rather, are threatened, it really disrupts the other. So to know all of these systems are intertwined with each other.
I'm thinking about parents, and I'm wondering, so when you have kids in the house who have ADHD who are having difficulty sleeping, it can sometimes be like really hard on the entire family in some ways, because you're trying to manage that sleep thing. Do you have suggestions for parents, perhaps like me, where they can't do it? They can't stay awake when their child's awake. What do you do?
So that's a really good point, because it's so important for caregivers to get their sleep, because we know, studies show this, that parents of children with ADHD can struggle with sleep issues because they're up, trying to get their kids to sleep, and it can be very frustrating. And it's important that parents have support and know that it's not a failure on their part. Their kid isn't meaning to be oppositional around bedtime and things like that. And to know that some of the things, again, that, that some parents maybe of non-ADHD children might suggest might not work for, their ADHD kid. And to not feel judged if your kid is the one running around the cul-de-sac and other people are like, what? Like, why are you doing that? But just like the old adage of you got to put the oxygen mask on yourself first, there are times that we just have to pick our battles. And I gave the suggestion to a parent recently where she said, I know that if I, go to bed before my son, he's going to be playing video games till like 2 a.m, and I have to make sure he's asleep because that's my job, as a parent. That she was burnt out and just really needed sleep. And I said, look, having him be up till 2 a.m. on a school night isn't going to be the end of the world for him. He'll have a crappy day, the next day, but you need sleep. So I said, just go to bed. You may be up till 2 a.m, but you can deal, with that after. Because if you're in a stronger place and feeling just more grounded, you can then be there and teaching him the skills to be more grounded. And it's not selfish. She felt selfish. She felt it was, self-centered to do that. I said, no. I said, ultimately, when we take care of ourselves as parents, we are taking care of our children. So also to rely, get support, negotiate, with other caregivers in the household to say, you know what, like, I need my 8 hours of sleep tonight. So if that means you might have to do that battle solely, and, sometimes in two-parent households, they might, feel like they both have to go in. And sometimes it's like, you know what, even if it's going to take a little bit more for you, I need my night's sleep, or vice versa. Like, you need to get, your good night's sleep. And then other times it's, okay, this is not a battle worth fighting today. Obviously if he was up every night at 2 a.m., it becomes, a problem. So it is very important for parents to also make sure that they're looking at themselves and their own health as well.
I think it's a perfect ending point to say it's not the end of the world today, right?
Exactly.
That's so perfect. I mean, we have so much good information. You taught us so much. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yes, thank you
my
so
pleasure.
much. I really learned a lot. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Roberto is a therapist in Lexington, Massachusetts, and the co-author of The Adonis Complex.
Adonis? The fuck is an Adonis already? I forgot. Like God?
You've been
God
listening to
complex?
It, part of the Understood Podcast Network.
You can listen and subscribe to In It wherever you get your podcasts.
And if you like what you heard today, please tell somebody about it.
Share it with the parents you know.
Share it with somebody else who might have a child with ADHD who just can't get to sleep.
Or send a link to a grown-up having the same problem.
In It is for you, so we want to make sure that you're getting what you need.
Go to u.org/init to find resources from every episode. That's the letter U, as in understood, .org/init.
And please share your thoughts with us. You can email us at init@understood.org, or you can leave us a message at 646-616-1213, extension 703. Again, that's 646-616-1213, extension 703. And we might just share what you have to say on a future episode.
As a nonprofit and social impact organization, Understood relies on the help of listeners like you to create podcasts like this one, to reach and support more people in more places. We have an ambitious mission to shape the world for difference, and we welcome you to join us in achieving our goals. Learn more at understood.org/mission.
In It is produced by Julie Subrin. Special thanks this week to Sarah Ivry. Justin D. Wright mixes the show. Mike Errico wrote our theme music. Laura Key is our editorial director at Understood. Scott Couchier is our creative director. And Seth Melnick and Brianna Berry are production directors.
Thanks for listening, everyone, and thanks for always being in it with us.
Get it started.
I'm getting annoyed by Zanya's, dude.
From the Understood Podcast Network, this is ADHD
Monkey
AHA,
Man is annoying.
a podcast where people share the moment when it finally clicked that they, or someone they know, has ADHD. My name is Laura Key. I'm the editorial director
Hi,
here at
Laura.
Understood. And as someone who's had my own ADHD AHA moment, I'll be your host.
Why so many people have ADHD?
Hi, everybody. For this episode, we're going to break from our usual format. Typically on ADHD AHA, you'll hear from people about their experience with ADHD symptoms, when and how they notice them, and how their attitudes about ADHD have changed. But some listeners have requested an ADHD explainer. They want an answer to the question, what is ADHD, on our show. And by the way, big thank you to all the listeners who've left comments and written in. I'd love to hear from more of you. You can email us at adhdaha@understood.org or rate us and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Tell your friends. But I digress. So when we were thinking about how to make an explainer about this complex topic, I realized that we didn't need to create one from scratch. Understood already has so much content about ADHD, and there's one video in particular that's really resonated for a lot of people. In the video, which you can find on our YouTube channel, Understood expert Dr. Thomas Brown breaks down everything you need to know about ADHD. This video really gets to the heart of what ADHD is, what causes it, and what it looks like. Dr. Brown is a clinical psychologist who specializes in, among other things, the assessment and treatment of adolescents and adults with ADHD. He has a very long and impressive resume, and hearing him speak before I got diagnosed with ADHD was instrumental in helping me understand what was going on. It's fair to say that his words have sparked lots of mini aha moments for me. So I wanted to share the audio here for you all. I'll be popping in and out with some quick thoughts here and there, but overall, I hope this is helpful and that you enjoy.
Your team has destroyed an inhibitor.
What we know as ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or some people still call it ADD, attention deficit disorder, has been recognized by some doctors since way back in 1902. But from 1902 until 1980, it was all about little boys who couldn't sit still, couldn't shut up, and were driving everybody nuts. It was just behavior problems. The name of the disorder was changed a number of times, and there were different formulations, but it was all about behavior problems. Since 1980, which is when they first changed the name of the disorder to include the words attention deficit, we've realized that this is not so much a behavior problem, but far more a problem with the brain's management system, its executive function. And we've also learned that there are many people who have ADHD who've never had any significant behavior problems. And that even for those who have, that's usually the least of it. It's the attention problems that tend to make more trouble for people, particularly as they get a little bit older and more is expected of them for being able to manage themselves. One thing that's important to be clear about from the very beginning is that ADHD has nothing to do with how smart a person is. There's some people who have this who are like super smart. Others high average, middle average, low average. I treat people for this who are like university professors and doctors and lawyers and big shots in business. A lot of people who are regular folks, some people have trouble doing the basics. You can be anything along the IQ spectrum and still have ADHD. It has nothing to do with how smart you are. The other thing to know is that this is a problem, a set of problems, that include a wide range of characteristics. And what I'd like to do today is to describe for you some of the characteristics of what we call ADHD, give some examples of them, and then talk a little bit about what we know about what's involved in the brain in the course of ADHD. One of the main things that people with ADHD complain about is they have trouble staying tuned. That when they're listening or reading or working on something, they get part of it, but then it sort of drifts off, and then they're back, and then they drift off, and it drifts off again, and then they're back. They have difficulty